Welcome to Invisible, Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction. I'm Dean Anderson, I'm your host. This is a show where we talk about addiction and all things in between in the city and surrounding areas of London, Ontario. We have a special guest today who is a repeat guest from last year, and the part of the reason being is that some of the feedback that we got from last season was we had an opportunity to talk more about the impacts that family have on substance use and vice versa, substance use having on the family impacts. So I thought, who better to have back on the show than Rick Cernick, author, professor, doctor, one of my mentors personally, a big fan. Rick, thank you for coming back on the show.
Dean, I appreciate you being so good to my ego. Thanks so much.
We got to pump it up, right? Because you know that you're not getting paid for this, right?
Same as usual, yes.
Right. So right off the gate, out of the gates, I want to talk about, I was very lucky to have a preview of some of the work that you were doing in writing some material in a new book about family and the impacts. And I was blown away by a lot of the stats and information. And I just want to hand you the stage and say, can you share some more about what you're doing and why you're doing this with the family and the impacts?
Sure. I'm a social worker, and social workers will get things through systems. And so historically, addiction has been very much focused on the individual person using the substance, and rightfully so. I mean, this is the person who has the issue. However, it's not a personal issue. It affects the family, it affects groups, it affects community. And so about 22 years ago now, I was asked by a group to write an article about addiction in family in Canada, and I couldn't find anything. So literally there was a dearth of knowledge. So we had to draw a lot of American information, but we know the United States of America is different from Canada, so we very much had to start from the ground up. And I discovered some interesting things. And again, these are generalities. I'm a professor, so we talk in probability and non-probability. But there tends to be two groups of people in the addiction community. And the individuals who have a substance use issue, whose families are very supportive of them and surround them. And sometimes those people surround them too much and are labeled for their support. And we have groups of individuals who the substance use is just overwhelms the family system and it breaks down. And in both cases, I want to start with the key point is that while the individual is central to the addiction process, so are the families. And we do a really bad job in London, in Ontario, and in Canada in supporting the families. Be they the ones that spend all their time supporting, or be the ones that have been so impacted they've drifted away. And so certainly those people who are working in this field, working in this area, if you're interested in addiction counseling, that's really something I'd recommend that you look at, not just supporting the individual, but supporting the family members, regardless of which camp they fall into.
You're preaching to the choir, so to speak, because I recognize that I have lots of family members that reach out to me and look at that, and there's a dichotomy there. There's a big gap in looking at either this tough love mentality where I just push you away, and then there's this other side where I'm going to try and save you, and I'm going to put all this work and energy and effort into there. But the reality of it is the family members need to do some things as well. Are there recommendations on what family members should be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. They should be seeking their own counseling. Yeah, they should be seeking their counseling in two different formats. One, family counseling is certainly wonderful, but also on their own, particularly for those individuals where there's been a drifting apart. They've still been impacted. There's a reason you're no longer in touch with someone that's a brother, a sister, a father, right? There's a reason you've fallen apart, and that can't help but impact upon you. The other part that I want to talk about a bit is this notion of people that sometimes they call them meshed. And they're so involved in the person trying to save the person that we give them the label codependency. Yeah. And so I want to talk about that as a social worker. If you had a heart attack and I was at your bedside every day because I loved you, and I wanted to make sure you get proper nutrition, proper care, it's COVID, we know we don't have the nursing care, I'm there all the time, I'm a good partner to you. But if you have an addiction and I'm sitting there supporting you, helping you get to work, making sure that you're close enough, good enough to get in the office and not smell too bad in the morning, I'm suddenly codependent. And so there's this notion of labeling people in the family who do things to support the individual. And again, it's not a singular phenomenon. There's a bunch of reasons for it. We are a married couple. You support me and the 3 kids. You lose your job, we go into poverty. I do everything I can to keep you going. I've been raised as a caregiver. My job is to support you and do what I can for you. You know what, normally I'd be labeled a good wife, a good husband, a good partner, but suddenly you have a substance use issue and now I'm codependent, I'm encouraging and labeling you. So we are actually quite nasty to the group that supports with substance use Because it goes back to stigma again, doesn't it, Dean? It's suddenly addiction is not a heart attack, it's not diabetes, it's suddenly your fault. And the support I would give you if you had cancer suddenly is not good because you have an addiction.
I totally get it, and I recognize that, and most people won't have that view when they talk about the codependency side of things and looking at it as there's a label that goes on to me as well. So here I am wanting to help a person, and I'm struggling with what the society thinks of me because I'm trying to help somebody. Wow, how hard is that, right? And then it perpetuates itself, right? So I recognize that part of the codependency and or using that term just because or meshed, whatever.
Enmeshed family, yes.
Enmeshed family codependency. One of the biggest problems that I face every day when I talk to people in those things is understanding the line between what's enabling and what's encouraging and what's, tough love, and there's all these different terminologies that we use when we decide that enough is enough, right? So how do we define that?
I mean, how do you find that in a healthy relationship, right? Of one, and the notion of enmeshment isn't just for addiction, it's in all sorts of family situations, is how close are you? And now I want to do a cultural piece. We know that people who are not North American born, who come to Canada, come to the United States, they have addiction issues too. In Canada, we're taught to be individuals, right? We want our children to go out and be individuals, go to post-secondary, get a career, get an internship, go out and be their own. Other cultures, they're multi-generational, right? If they don't understand why those of us from the West aren't living with the grandparents, why the grandparents aren't helping raise the kids. So number one, there's this notion of what's your construct of the family? How engaged should you be? How much support do you want to be? At the university, we talk about helicopter parents. The parents who come in, want their kids go into residence. In other cultures, the notion is if you don't support your children until they have their own home, you're a bad parent. So the beginning point of that is, what is your definition of a healthy family? And I don't have an answer for you. Where do you draw a line that you and I are in a relationship where we support and love each other? Is that when you've got a need, you become first. When I have a need, I become first. In the family with addiction, that's where the skew happens. The person with the addiction becomes front, center all the time. The other person becomes secondary, and they lose themselves in the addiction. That's when we have the enmeshment there, is when the person loses their own goals, their own responsibility to their own lives, responsibility to their children, to their other families, and their life becomes just supporting this one. Again, though, when someone has cancer, that's what happens. We spend all our time making sure this person recovers from cancer.
Mm-hmm. And that's altruistic, though.
That's a relationship, right? I mean, we aspire to have loving, healthy relationships, and part of it is support. And that's the question is, when you have someone that has an illness, a chronic illness, you support them. When it's an addiction, again, we give you a label. When doing the counseling is, what are you doing for yourself, right? You've got to support this person, and are they doing everything for them, or do you enable them to do things for themselves? Enabling you, so enabling in a different context, to be yourself as well too. So that's the balance we're looking for in counseling, is to be there to be supportive, but not lose yourself, lose your sense of your individuality, lose your responsibilities to your family, your community, to yourself, and being all the time here. If it's 6 weeks and someone's got cancer, boom, we're in the hospital, someone's recovering. But if you're now in year 3, year 4, year 5 of some of the substance use issue, and they haven't progressed, moved forward, sought treatment, gone to mutual aid group, and you're still there 5 years later, how much have you been absorbed into them and lost yourself?
So I'm hearing that it has a lot to do with beliefs and values and your understanding of what's important and the subjective, and you determining where you want to step into that and play that role. And it's different for every individual, and we shouldn't be shamed for how much we want to help someone else.
And then we do the important thing. And I ask you, when you were growing up, where did you sit at the family dining room table? When you ate, where did you sit? Because how we become partners and lovers and parents is how we were taught to be partners and lovers and parents. So what was our own family dynamic growing up? So if you always sat to the right side of your mother because you were the oldest child and had to do all the caretaking for your 3 younger siblings, that notion of you being responsible is taught for you. If you're the youngest and you've been taken care of because you've got 3 older siblings, again, that's a role that you don't even consciously aware of, but that's a role you're taught sitting around your family table.
Right, so we can get into all the different family systems and all that other stuff on top of that. So there's a lot of dynamics that go into there. So I heard you say earlier, the family, you should probably get counseling for yourself. You should do something for you in order, because of this dichotomy and this, trying to find this fine line. the thing that I hear, and I have heard, is I'm not the one with the problem. Why do I need to get help? So what do you say to somebody who says something like that or sees it in that way?
Yeah, I think that's a great response. But aren't you affected? Doesn't this make you sad and doesn't make you angry? Doesn't affect the way you parent? Doesn't affect the way you work? You're right, it's not your substance use, but the impact upon you living in this closed loop, this closed system, how can it now help you? Right? Yeah. And so the notion of, and again, this is me having done this for nearly 40 years, is that I have a belief that everyone needs counseling. And if you haven't thought about the hardship in your life, the trauma in your life, the obstacles you've overcome or not overcome, let alone, that's just normal life, let alone add now the huge barrier of an addiction being in your family. And again, looking at your family, what do your family think of your partner, your husband, your wife who's got an addiction issue? Are you engaged in your family? Are they giving you advice? Are they supporting or shunning you? This is a whole lot of the larger dynamic. So when you think about families, we think about the nuclear family, which is lovely. But when I think about family, I think about family of origin, and I think of the family that you inherit through marrying or being in someone in a relationship. That's all your family system.
Right. And those are filled with bias and uncertainties and judgments and all of those things. And you're wanting to rule and run your life and make your decisions based on, the peanut gallery, so to speak. Right?
And I'm not sure about your family, Dean, but when I go to family dinners, everyone knows more about addiction than I do. And so you're right, everyone's got an opinion. And typically, where's the opinion come from? Is it an informed opinion? And that's why we go to school and study, is that we have a systematic, empirical-based knowledge. And it's still fuzzy, right? But again, if you're getting your information, and I hate to say this because it's too cliche, my research on the internet, if that's your source of knowledge, about, 79% is biased or flawed. Yeah. And so again, you've got your right to opinion, you've got a right to your perspective, but what is it based upon? And what interactions have you had that's created that?
Right. So there's lots of variables here, lots of things to juggle around. The biggest takeaway for me of this whole thing is to recognize that it's really important for the family members to seek help just as much as the individuals. And it also creates, if I'm trying to teach my child to be a good driver, it's probably a good idea for me to be a good driver, right? So just that impression that it puts to say, I'm going and doing my own thing and I'm taking care of me. The person with the addiction goes, okay, I recognize you're doing that. Then, not always, and hopefully it does, but when someone's working on themselves, it also comes over so they learn better life skills and they're communicating better and they're coping better in the dynamic, and there's that osmosis that spreads into the adjacent family as well, right?
I love your analogy as well too, because when you learn to drive, first you go to a professional that give you some lessons, and then you go out with your mom, your brother, your older sister, whatever it is, to teach you. But you've got some guidelines before you start creating your own element. And that's where the counseling comes in. What I tell all my students as well, not mind people with family addiction issues, if you don't take care of yourself, how can you take care of anybody else?
Wonderful. Thank you, Rick. That's awesome. I love having you on the show, and hopefully we're going to be 3, 4, 5 more seasons, and we'll have you back. So much knowledge, so much wisdom, and it's a great conversation. I appreciate you being here, and thanks again.
Thank you very much, Dean.
Awesome. And we will be right back after this break. Welcome back to Invisible, Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction. Earlier in the show, we had a lovely guest, Rick Cernick, on, and he shared with us all the ins and outs and some of the impacts that family relations can have with and without addiction. And now we've been gifted the opportunity to talk to somebody with some real life experience about what it means to have somebody in the family and the trials and tribulations about it. So I'd like to welcome our guest, Carla Trapegne.
Nice to be here.
Hi, how are you?
Good, and you?
Wonderful. I'm fantastic. I'm so happy to have you here on the show, and it's such a difficult thing to talk about when there's so much. I mean, the show is about stigma and addiction, so we recognize how much stigma and how difficult it is. So trying to get somebody to be on the show that's willing to talk about it without having negative impacts is a big deal. So once again, thank you very much for being here.
It is an honor to be here. I can absolutely appreciate the stigma. We recover out loud, which is shocking in all aspects. I can't believe it. So many people cannot believe that we share about our experience, but I don't believe that we can help anybody by just staying silent.
Wonderful. So you're here and you're going to share some good stuff with us.
I am.
Wonderful. So what is it that you think is the biggest thing that's overlooked in this whole process? What's the thing that people don't recognize when it comes to the family's impact of addiction?
I believe that there's such a huge stigma around the addict alcoholic themselves that you almost get stuck at that, right? We think that alcoholics and addicts are the, bums under the bridge with the brown paper bags, and you drive by them and you see them and you can't believe that their families, I feel personally like their families have just thrown them out, right? There's nobody there to help them. And as a family member of an addict, I promise you, there is nothing we can do to save them. And as someone who has been in it for 16 years, I did everything I could. Everything. It's huge. I didn't cause it, first and foremost, which I spent most of the time in addiction believing that had I been a better wife, had I worked harder, had I loved him harder, had I made more money, I would be able to pull him out of that realm. I cannot control it. And believe you me, I tried. I have tried everything possible to keep him sober. And I cannot cure it. I cannot cure it, which is a very tough pill to swallow as someone who wants to control everything. And it's not just as easy as putting the bottle down. And I think a lot of people believe that's it. Why don't you just stop? And I truly believed everything that I was doing when we were in the thick of it was helping him. And until we got to treatment, there was a family program which saved my life. I had no idea the damage I was doing. That good old enabling word. I had no idea. When they said that he was going to go in for 19 days, I was like, what are they going to do in 19 days that I haven't done in 16 years? Like, I've kept this man alive.
Right.
I was on this huge pedestal, and many people after Frank, my spouse, got sober, said, you saved his life. But I didn't. He saved his own. I saved mine.
Mm-hmm. What do you think was the tipping point outside of, I recognize the value of the treatment and recognize the value of being around other people, but what was the tipping point for yourself that said, okay, this isn't what I thought it was?
As in?
When did you recognize that there was a lot of you trying to make changes to fix something within him?
Yes.
But was there a turning point in yourself when you recognized that it's not mine, it's his?
So actually, the day that Frank got honest and said, I need help, was the day. I believe, it was miraculous, it really was. Our rock bottoms were the same day. So he was on day 3 of not going to work and staying home, and I had went to work. And I was a mess. I couldn't function, and my boss literally kicked me out, said, go home. And I've never missed a day, ever. Like, work is I'm very committed, right? So I'm driving home, and I'm like, I can't live like this anymore. This is not working. And there was no ultimatums or anything. I just went home and I approached him and I said, I'm done. I don't know what we do. I don't know how we do it, but I won't live like this anymore. Like, I was on meds for depression, for anxiety, down to 100 pounds soaking wet. Like, couldn't function at all. I couldn't sleep. I wasn't sleeping. I was definitely not a good mother at all. His addiction was priority. My children were no longer priority. Everything was about trying to out him and fix him, and I was just done. I was just done. And fortunately, so was he.
Wow. some major impacts in every area of your life.
Absolutely.
So I'm hearing physically, emotionally, spiritually, family relationships.
Absolutely. Addiction, what people don't realize is that addicts and alcoholics make us sick, if not as sick, much sicker than they. What people don't realize is the family members actually will suffer the same ailments as an alcoholic and an addict. And I don't think people realize that. I didn't even realize that, you know, and when we started going through everything, because he was dying, his organs were shutting down and everything. And when we went through it all, it was like, oh yeah, I'm medicated too. I'm, you know, not sleeping, and I had, you know, stress-related ailments that needed medical attention. And I just assumed it was eating habits, lifestyle choices, but really it was because of everything that we had been through in regards to his addiction.
Right. So you, prior to us starting filming, you self-identified as someone who was codependent. So a big grin and a nod,
Yeah.
yes. So that that idea of codependency, some people would describe it as having an addiction to the person with the addiction, right?
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
I was obsessed. Obsessed. Absolutely. And I didn't, to be honest, and when we went to this family program, they put up a definition of a codependent. And my very good friend was with me. And they put up the definition, and he clears his throat, and I will not make eye contact at all, you know. And he kind of gives the nod, and I was like, please don't. He was like, they should just erase codependent and put Carla Trapegne up there. Like I was every tab. Yep, check all those boxes. Absolutely.
Right. So now we recognize that, you know, through our conversation, that there's an addiction to the person with the addiction. So what's the treatment?
It's not an easy one.
No. So, I mean, this is why we're here, because we're talking about addiction, and we recognize that the addiction also has a connection to the codependent addiction. So it would be fair enough to say that you've got to overcome a lot of the exact same things as the person with the addiction, correct?
Absolutely.
Right.
I had to learn how to stay in my own lane. I went to, and I still do very much so, because my recovery is priority. So going to meetings, which I had no idea existed, that we have our own meetings. I had my own group of people.
You're referring to Al-Anon?
Al-Anon,
Okay.
yes, sorry.
That's okay.
With, you know, I didn't have to be alone anymore. You know, these are things that we did not share. Our group of friends with our family, you did not share that Frank had a problem.
Right.
So then, definitely, I kept everything in. I didn't speak at all. And I remember going to my first meeting and hearing all of these people speak, and it was like tears, like just so overwhelming, because I was no longer alone. There is a platform where we can share our struggles, you know, the literature, you know, just as AA has their own literature, Al-Anon has their own. So to be able to sit there and read and be like, this is my life. This is my life. And I started, you know, really 100% journaling and really taking a look at all of the decisions. Every decision I made was based on Frank's reaction. Or, you know, I never made a decision for myself. I was not priority at all. And so I started making myself priority.
So very reactive instead of proactive?
Absolutely.
So making yourself more proactive was effective?
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
So I'm also hearing that going into a room full of people with the same experiences, and this is my money shot. People don't recognize the validity and power that has to break away stigma. Because when you walk in and see that there's so many people there living and going through the same thing, the immediate feeling that you have is,
I am no longer alone.
Yeah. Connection, right? And that's, you know,
Absolutely.
so, and there's an isolation that comes with stigma that says, I'm all alone, I'm different, I'm broken, my family's broken, there's things wrong here, right? I don't like the terminology broken, but that's the feeling, right?
We very much were that poster family on Facebook. Family photos for every season, selfies. I was definitely the mom behind the scenes that said, if you don't smile, so help me God, right?
Yep.
And we posted those and we were
Yep.
happy, you know, on screen.
Right, yeah.
And meanwhile, I was dying inside.
I get it.
It was horrifying. I had this beautiful idea of what we were supposed to be, and we were so far from it. But we, you know, we had to show that we were,
Right.
we're good, we're happy, you know, and which is why it's so important for us and so huge to recover out loud. You are not alone. There are
love that.
so many people suffering, and it's people just don't. There's that stigma. They take the human away. They dehumanize addicts and alcoholics. That's someone's husband. That's someone's son. You know, someone's daughter. And they don't choose to live like this. They really don't.
Right. And that's why we're here.
You know?
Wow. So thank you so much for all that powerful message.
You're welcome.
You got me a little choked up at a couple of spots there, and I appreciate your vulnerability and your openness and the recognition that being open and talking about these things in a public setting, like you said to me earlier before the show, I get a platform to be able to share this information because it wasn't there for me when I had, you know, over
Absolutely.
years. So I appreciate that so much. I appreciate you being on the show. Thank you, Carla. And we will be right back after this break. So much emotion in today's episode. We can quickly recognize that when it comes to the people that we love and they're suffering, that emotions are going to take the front seat. And it happens. And I think the key point that was put across today was that that's okay, but we need to take care of ourselves first, and we need to understand those emotions. When I have people come to me in my professional work, one of the first things that they want to make sure that they won't have later is regret. And they don't want to think that they didn't do enough. And one of the quickest and easiest ways to do that, as Rick had put, is to look at your own beliefs and values and make sure that you're working from your own compass. Because if we decide that we want to try and fix things and it doesn't work, then we're the only ones to blame. So the answer, or the biggest answer that we can find right now when it comes to working with families, is work on yourself, help you be better so that you can be there for your loved ones. And remember, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is now.